The sun had barely crested the horizon at Chicago O'Hare International Airport, painting the tarmac in streaks of gold and orange. The hum of early morning activity filled the air, luggage carts clattering, engines warming, flight crews moving with brisk precision. Among the crowds, an 11-year-old girl sat quietly in seat 14C of Flight 232, clutching a well-loved stuffed owl to her chest. Emma Harper's eyelids were heavy, and she had already drifted into the soft cocoon of sleep. She had flown plenty before, but always under the watchful eye of her parents. Today was different. She was alone, heading to Dallas to visit her grandmother. Around her, the cabin was alive with motion. Parents jostled with toddlers, travelers scrolled through their phones, and flight attendants moved between rows, offering coffee and pastries. The smell of fresh bread and jet fuel mingled oddly in the air. Outside the window, the silver fuselage of the plane gleamed in the morning sun, engines humming in anticipation of the journey. Emma shifted slightly in her seat, mumbling softly, unaware that this flight was about to become far more than an ordinary trip. As the plane began its slow taxi toward runway 27L, the familiar roar of engines vibrated through the floor. Emma's small hand brushed against the armrest as her mind drifted to thoughts of her grandmother's garden, the smell of fresh cookies, and the new puppy waiting at the other end. She was oblivious to the tension beginning to rise in the cockpit. Then, without warning, a loud clunk reverberated through the cabin. Passengers stiffened, eyes darting around nervously. A few murmured in confusion, others glanced at the flight attendants, who themselves exchanged uneasy glances. Emma stirred, her brows knitting together in curiosity. Even in her sleepy haze, she sensed something unusual. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm yet carrying an edge that made heads turn. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've encountered a technical issue. Please remain seated and stay calm. And is there a fighter pilot on board?" A ripple of confusion swept through the cabin. Emma's eyes snapped open, heart skipping a beat. Fighter pilot, she blinked, trying to understand. The phrase sounded absurd, but at the same time her chest tightened. She knew exactly what that meant. It wasn't a joke. Passengers whispered nervously. A businessman muttered to his colleague, "Did he just ask for a pilot on a commercial flight?" Flight attendants hovered near the front, unsure whether to offer reassurance or brace for chaos. Emma's pulse quickened. She had never revealed her secret, her early flight training, her small private jets, her countless hours practicing emergency maneuvers. Only her father knew, and he had always warned, "The world isn't ready for what you can do." Emma shifted in her seat, the stuffed owl pressed to her chest. Memories of her lessons flashed in her mind. How to react under pressure, how to calculate angles and speed, how to remain calm even when the impossible was happening. She had been dreaming of scenarios like this for years, running through simulations in her mind, imagining herself saving a plane. But never did she expect to be faced with one in real life. Another clunk echoed, this time from the cockpit. The vibration traveled down the aisle, rattling seat belts and sending a few bags rolling in the overhead compartments. Passengers gasped and clutched their armrests. The plane shuddered slightly, the engines humming louder in protest. "Is there a trained pilot on board who can assist with flight controls?" The captain repeated, urgency sharpening his tone. "This is not a drill." Emma's heart thumped so loudly she feared it might be heard by the passengers around her. She glanced down at her backpack under the seat. Inside, neatly tucked away, were her miniature flight gloves, a small helmet she'd smuggled from her last training session, and a notebook filled with diagrams of emergency maneuvers, wing adjustments, and cockpit protocols. Her fingers trembled as they grazed the zipper. She drew in a shaky breath, fighting the rising tide of panic. She knew her secret would be exposed the moment she moved forward. Would anyone believe an 11-year-old could do this? She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her small shoulders. The plane was over 30,000 feet above the ground, carrying nearly 200 passengers. If she failed, Emma closed her eyes for a brief second, imagining her father's face. His voice, calm yet firm, echoed in her mind. "You're ready for this, Emma. Trust yourself. Trust your training." Her eyelids snapped open. She had made her decision. Clutching the stuffed owl tightly, she slid from her seat, moving carefully through the aisle as passengers stared in stunned silence. Whispers followed her like a trail of electricity. "Is that a kid?" one woman murmured. "She's going to the cockpit." Flight attendants stepped aside, a mixture of awe and fear on their faces. The co-pilot's eyes widened when he saw her small frame approach the cockpit door. The captain turned, his brow furrowed in disbelief. "You?" he asked, incredulity coloring his voice. Emma nodded, holding the stuffed owl for courage and nothing else. The hum of engines, the faint scent of coffee, and the low vibration of the plane underfoot faded into the background. All that mattered was the cockpit, the controls, and the responsibility that now rested on a girl no one expected to save them. Emma's small hand gripped the auxiliary jump seat handle, her knuckles white. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "I can do this." A flash of turbulence shook the plane, rattling windows and tray tables. The cabin erupted in murmurs, and a few passengers let out sharp gasps. Emma steadied herself, heart pounding. The captain's voice came again, now almost urgent, trembling slightly despite his professional composure. "We need immediate assistance. Hydraulics on the left wing are failing. We're counting on anyone with high-performance flight experience, please." Emma's stomach twisted. She had trained for moments like this, but never with real lives hanging in the balance. The magnitude of the situation crashed over her like a wave. Every instinct, every calculation she had ever learned now had to be real. There was no simulation, no pause button, no rewind. The plane jolted again, sharper this time, sending a ripple of panic through the cabin. Passengers clutched their armrests, children whimpered, and phones snapped to life as some attempted to record the unfolding scene. Emma's gaze hardened, determination eclipsing fear. The ordinary flight she had anticipated, the routine journey to her grandmother's house, was gone. In its place was a high-stakes emergency, and she was the unexpected variable that could save or doom every single soul on board. The captain's final words before she entered the cockpit were calm, yet fraught with tension. "We don't have much time, kid. Can you handle this?" Emma swallowed hard, her small frame stiff with focus. She nodded, her voice barely audible. "I'll do my best." As she stepped into the cockpit, the hum of engines felt louder, the lights harsher, and the controls more complex than ever before. The door closed behind her with a soft thud, cutting off the murmurs of terrified passengers. Outside the window, the sky stretched wide and stormy, as if testing her resolve. And in that suspended moment, 11-year-old Emma Harper, sleepy and underestimated, became the most important person on the plane. The world below might have thought she was just a child, but at 35,000 feet she was the only hope. The cockpit felt impossibly small for the weight of the world resting inside it. Emma's eyes darted over the complex array of instruments, switches, and flashing lights. The co-pilot, a man in his late 30s with a salt-and-pepper beard, leaned back in his seat, jaw slack in disbelief. You're 11, he stammered, almost as if speaking the words aloud might shatter the fragile reality before him. Emma swallowed hard, gripping the auxiliary jump seat. Her tiny hands, trained through years of simulator hours and weekend lessons, hovered over the controls. "I can do it," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Inside, panic clawed at her chest like a wild animal, but she forced herself to focus. There was no room for hesitation, no luxury of fear. Behind her, the cabin was a boiling sea of tension. Passengers whispered and craned their necks to peek toward the cockpit. Flight attendants hovered near the first-class section, ready to calm anyone who panicked. A man with a suit wrinkled from too many early morning flights muttered under his breath, "This has to be a joke, a kid." He gripped the armrest so tightly, his knuckles turned white. The captain exhaled, wiping sweat from his brow. Left-wing hydraulics are failing faster than expected, he said. His voice was calm, but the tightness in his jaw betrayed him. We're losing control surfaces. The autopilot can only do so much. Emma, I need you to take over auxiliary stabilization immediately. Emma nodded, every muscle in her body tensed. She glanced down at her backpack under the seat, then back at the controls. There was no turning back now. One wrong move and the plane could roll uncontrollably, sending nearly 200 lives hurtling toward disaster. She thought of the children, the parents, the elderly woman clutching a cross necklace. She thought of the stories she had imagined as a little girl, the impossible scenarios, the ones that always ended with a hero saving the day. Now that imaginary hero had a face, her own. The co-pilot's voice broke through her concentration. I don't even know how to, he began, then caught himself. Okay, fine, I'll follow your lead. His disbelief was palpable, but there was also a glimmer of hope. Emma's small fingers flew over the controls, adjusting flaps, rudders, and throttle with precise calculations that belied her age. Each minor correction stabilized the plane slightly, but turbulence still battered the fuselage, shaking the cabin with deafening claps of wind and thunder. The passengers were beginning to sense something extraordinary was happening. A man in row 15 clutched his wife's hand. Is she flying the plane? He whispered, eyes wide. A mother covered her child's ears, trying to shield him from the raw sound of stress and panic. Through the cabin, a strange hush fell, a mix of fear and awe. No one could believe what they were witnessing. Emma's mind raced through a series of emergency protocols she had memorized, each drilled until muscle memory would take over if panic set in. She visualized the plane's trajectory, the hydraulics, the engine response. She visualized herself landing a jet, something she had done countless times in simulators, but this was no simulator. The weight, the sound, the responsibility were all painfully real. Emma, the captain said, his voice sharp but calm, we're approaching Dallas. If we don't stabilize the wing soon, the landing will be catastrophic. Can you manage the final approach? Her stomach twisted. She nodded, even as beads of sweat formed along her hairline. Yes, she whispered. Every instinct screamed in terror, but she relied on training, on countless hours spent imagining emergencies like this. She knew she had to succeed. Another sharp jolt threw the plane into a minor roll. Passengers gasped, and a few bags tumbled from overhead bins. Flight attendants tightened their grips on rails, bracing for impact. Emma's fingers danced over the auxiliary controls, correcting the tilt, countering the roll. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the plane began to level. The co-pilot exhaled, astonished. How are you doing this? He murmured, almost to himself. I've flown for 20 years. I've never handled a situation like this at full altitude, and yet... His voice trailed off as he watched the girl in awe, realizing she had somehow taken command of a situation that could have been fatal. Meanwhile, Emma could feel the tension in the cabin through the vibrations of the floor and walls. The screams had stopped. The murmurs had quieted. Everyone knew something extraordinary was happening. She tried not to let the enormity of it overwhelm her. Each adjustment, each calculation was critical. One misstep could send the plane spiraling out of control. She glanced at the instruments. Warning lights blinked furiously, signaling failures she barely had time to acknowledge. She had memorized the cockpit layout from countless simulator hours, but real hydraulics and engine feedback were far more nuanced. She relied on intuition, trained reflexes, and a deep, almost instinctive understanding of flight mechanics that seemed impossible for someone her age. The captain broke the silence, voice taut with urgency. Emma, the left wing flaps are not responding. We may need to execute a manual stabilization landing. Are you prepared? Her heart leapt into her throat. The manual stabilization landing was the most dangerous maneuver imaginable for a commercial jet, something that even seasoned pilots approached with extreme caution. She nodded, determination overtaking fear. I'm ready. Outside the cockpit windows, storm clouds churned like dark oceans, and the Dallas skyline flickered through breaks in the clouds, a distant and fragile beacon. The runway lights gleamed faintly, taunting her with both hope and challenge. One wrong angle, one miscalculation, and the plane could slide off the runway, or worse. Emma inhaled deeply, letting the rhythmic hum of engines ground her, letting years of training and instinct guide her. She adjusted the auxiliary controls, countering minor oscillations, stabilizing the aircraft for descent. The plane leveled just enough to give hope, but it was fragile, teetering on the knife edge between control and disaster. The co-pilot looked at her, disbelief melting into a grudging admiration. "I don't know how you're doing this," he said quietly, voice nearly trembling. You're amazing." Emma's gaze swept the cabin through the small cockpit window. She saw frightened faces, hands gripping armrests, a little girl clutching her mother's necklace as if praying. Each life in the cabin pressed down on her like invisible weights, amplifying the responsibility. Failure wasn't an option. Another shudder ran through the plane, stronger this time, rattling every tray and seatbelt. The plane lurched forward, then righted itself. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She had managed to stabilize it for now. But the final approach, the critical moments before landing, loomed ahead like a storm on the horizon. The captain's voice softened, almost reverent. "Emma, you might just be the most remarkable pilot I've ever seen." Emma swallowed hard, focusing on the next steps. She knew the real test, the one that would determine whether they all survived, was coming. She could feel it in her bones. Every instinct screamed that this was the moment where skill, courage, and precision would collide. And for the passengers, unaware of her age or training, the quiet fear that had settled over them now carried a strange mix of awe and hope. Something extraordinary was happening in the cockpit, something no one could have predicted. Emma pressed forward, determination blazing behind her young eyes, preparing for the descent that would define not just the flight, but her entire life. The cockpit was a whirlwind of lights, alarms, and the relentless vibration of the plane as it battled turbulence above the clouds. Emma Harper's small hands moved over the auxiliary controls with precision, countering every jolt, every oscillation. Sweat slicked her brow, but she ignored it, her mind honed on a singular purpose: stabilize the plane and bring everyone home alive. The co-pilot, still in disbelief, kept a hand hovering near the throttle. "I've flown hundreds of emergency landings," he muttered under his breath, eyes wide. "Never had a kid handle anything like this." He swallowed, leaning over to monitor her movements, trusting the impossible, an 11-year-old with a lifetime of secret training. Emma's eyes flicked to the instrument panel. Red warning lights blinked furiously, each one a reminder that the left-wing hydraulics were failing. She had trained for emergencies, but never under real-world pressure with lives literally hanging in the balance. Her heartbeat raced, pounding in her ears, yet she drew in a steadying breath. Panic would not help. Focus would. "Emma," the captain said, voice taut with urgency, "we're approaching critical altitude. You need to prepare for assisted manual stabilization. Are you ready?" Emma's fingers tightened around the controls. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firm despite the trembling in her stomach. She had visualized this 1,000 times in simulators, but now reality was sharper, crueler. She imagined the faces of the passengers, their trust unknowingly resting on her small shoulders. She could not fail. Suddenly, the plane jolted violently. A deep, metallic groan echoed through the fuselage. Sparks flickered on the overhead console, warning lights flaring with urgent brightness. The left wing shuddered, responding sluggishly to her adjustments. Emma's stomach lurched, but she held fast, manipulating the controls with meticulous precision. A flash of fear ran through her. She was no longer just an 11-year-old girl on a plane. She was the sole line of defense against disaster. Every calculation mattered. Every second counted. "Emma, the hydraulic response is weaker than expected." the co-pilot shouted, voice tinged with panic. "If we don't correct this immediately." His words trailed off, swallowed by the roar of engines and the vibration of the plane. Emma focused, shutting out the chaos around her. Her training kicked in. She calculated angles, throttle adjustments, and flap corrections with lightning speed. She pushed the auxiliary stabilizers just enough to compensate, the plane teetering like a tightrope walker on a wire. Behind her, the cabin shuddered with turbulence. Passengers gasped, some crying, some gripping armrests until their knuckles turned white. A mother in row 12 whispered prayers over her child's head, while an elderly man clutched a rosary, muttering under his breath. No one could see her face, but they felt her presence through the subtle stabilization of the plane. The captain exhaled, wiping a sheen of sweat from his forehead. "Emma, you're doing incredible," he said, though tension still clouded his voice. "Keep her steady. We've got a narrow window to attempt controlled descent." Emma nodded, eyes fixed on the instruments. Outside, storm clouds swirled like dark oceans, the city of Dallas a fragile beacon through the haze. She could see the faint runway lights, flickering like stars in the distance, but the approach would not be smooth. The plane groaned with every gust, testing the limits of her control. A sudden lurch sent the plane tilting dangerously to the left. Emma's stomach flipped. She reacted instinctively, adjusting the rudder and throttle simultaneously. The plane righted itself, though the left wing remained sluggish. Her heart hammered, but relief was fleeting. She knew the real challenge, the landing, was still ahead. "Emma, do you see the wind shear warning?" the co-pilot asked, voice tight. "It's stronger than anticipated. You'll need to adjust for lateral drift during descent." She nodded, mentally running calculations she had memorized during weekend lessons and simulator hours. She visualized the plane's trajectory, anticipating every possible movement. The cabin trembled as she executed a series of precise maneuvers, stabilizing the wing enough to maintain level flight. A sudden spark flashed from the cockpit console. Warning lights blinked faster, red and insistent. Emma's pulse raced. She reached instinctively for the auxiliary stabilizers, her small fingers flying over switches, dials, and levers. The plane quivered but did not spiral. She had managed to regain control. The captain let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "That was extraordinary," he muttered. "Keep it steady. We're not out of the woods yet." Emma's eyes flicked to the small window beside her. She caught a glimpse of the passengers, their faces pale, eyes wide with terror and awe. They had no idea that salvation rested in the hands of a girl they had assumed was just a sleepy child. She drew in a steadying breath, trying to calm the adrenaline coursing through her body. The co-pilot's skepticism had transformed into a mixture of disbelief and admiration. "I don't even know how you're doing this," he whispered. It's impossible." Emma pressed on, small hands moving with unwavering precision. She had trained for emergencies, but never with real passengers. The stakes were real, the danger tangible. She visualized the runway, running every possible scenario in her mind. There was no margin for error. "Emma," the captain said, voice low but urgent, "we may need to attempt manual stabilization landing. Can you handle it?" Her stomach twisted, but she nodded firmly. "Yes, I can." The plane lurched again, stronger this time, throwing passengers into brief panic. Drinks spilled and luggage rattled from overhead compartments. Flight attendants gripped rails, bracing themselves as the cabin trembled. Emma's focus sharpened. This was no longer practice. This was survival. Every maneuver, every adjustment could mean the difference between life and death. She pressed forward, adjusting flaps, rudder, and throttle with skill that belied her age. Slowly, imperceptibly, the plane began to respond. The left wing stabilized, though it remained fragile, like a damaged bird learning to fly again. The captain exhaled, voice tinged with awe. "Emma, you're a natural. I've never seen anything like this." Emma's gaze swept across the cockpit instruments. Sparks still flickered, Alarms still blared, but she had control, if only barely. She had stabilized the plane enough to attempt descent, but the final approach loomed ahead, a delicate ballet of precision, courage, and nerves. Outside, the Dallas skyline shimmered faintly through the clouds, a distant promise of safety. But Emma knew the worst was yet to come. The runway would not forgive mistakes, and the plane's damaged hydraulics left no room for error. Her hands tightened on the controls. Every instinct screamed that the coming moments would test everything she had learned, every skill she had honed, every ounce of courage in her small body. She glanced at the captain. His eyes held equal parts hope and fear. The co-pilot watched her, disbelief etched across his face. Emma drew in a deep breath, heart hammering in her chest. She had faced simulations. She had faced impossible scenarios in training, but never with real lives at stake. The plane's fate and everyone aboard rested entirely in her hands. And as the storm clouds swirled outside and the city lights shimmered faintly below, Emma Harper understood one unshakable truth. She was no longer just an 11-year-old girl on a plane. She was the only hope for 200 souls, teetering on the razor's edge between catastrophe and survival. The cockpit was a crucible of tension. Lights flashed, warning chimes shrilled, and the faint hum of the engines vibrated through every panel. Emma Harper's small hands clutched the auxiliary controls, her knuckles white as she navigated the delicate balance between life and death. Every movement of her fingers, every tilt of the control stick, carried weight that no simulation could replicate. The co-pilot, still processing the impossibility of the situation, leaned over slightly, eyes wide with awe. "I've flown emergency descents my entire career," he muttered, voice tight. "Never like this, never with her." He trailed off, unable to finish the thought aloud. Outside, storm clouds roiled like angry seas. Lightning flashed intermittently, illuminating the small cabin with stark, unnatural light. The plane trembled violently, sending a ripple of tension through the passengers. Some gripped armrests until their knuckles were white, others prayed silently. A mother whispered over her child, trying to calm him, while a businessman in row 17 muttered curses under his breath. Emma's heart pounded, but she refused to let panic take hold. Each flash of lightning, each violent jolt became part of her calculations. She adjusted the auxiliary stabilizers, compensating for the failing left-wing hydraulics. Slowly, painstakingly, the plane leveled. The co-pilot exhaled, a mixture of disbelief and relief. "Emma," the captain said, voice taut with urgency, "we're entering final descent range. You'll need to take full control, manual stabilization. Do you understand the risks?" She nodded, swallowing hard. "I understand." The cabin shuddered again as turbulence hit with renewed intensity. Drinks spilled, luggage shifted, and a few overhead bins popped open, scattering belongings across the aisle. Emma's stomach lurched with every sudden movement, but she forced herself to focus. One wrong adjustment could send the plane spiraling out of control. Her training kicked in. Years of simulator hours, weekends at small airfields, and secret lessons with her father converged into instinctive reactions. She adjusted the flaps, monitored airspeed, and countered the tilt of the damaged wing. Slowly, the plane began to stabilize, responding to her careful, deliberate maneuvers. The captain's voice softened, tinged with awe. "Emma, this is incredible. Hold her steady. We've got a chance if we keep this up." Emma's eyes flicked to the cockpit instruments, then back to the horizon. Through the storm, she could see the faint glimmer of the Dallas skyline, a fragile promise of safety. But the runway was still miles away, and the plane's damaged hydraulics left no room for error. She could feel the subtle shifts in airflow, the faint quiver of metal as stress built in the wings. Every decision had to be precise. A sudden jolt sent the plane tilting sharply to the left. Emma's stomach flipped. She reacted instinctively, adjusting the rudder and throttle simultaneously. The plane righted itself, though the left wing remained sluggish. Her heart raced. This was no longer just an exercise in skill. It was a test of courage, precision, and nerve. The co-pilot leaned closer, voice tight. "Wind shear stronger than predicted," he said. "You'll need to compensate during descent." Emma's mind raced. She visualized the trajectory, calculating angles and speed adjustments in real time. The plane's instruments were her guide, but instinct drove her hands. Slowly, imperceptibly, the aircraft responded, leveling enough to continue its approach. Back in the cabin, passengers were silent, sensing the gravity of the situation. Some clutched hands, some whispered prayers. The hum of engines, the vibration of the fuselage, and the occasional creak of stressed metal filled the air. Every second stretched into eternity. The captain's voice broke the tense silence. "Emma, you're doing something extraordinary. Keep her steady. This is our only shot." Emma pressed on, small hands moving with unwavering precision. Sweat dripped into her eyes, but she ignored it, focusing on the instruments, the horizon, and the faint runway lights flickering in the distance. She had trained for emergencies, but never with actual passengers. Every adjustment mattered. Every calculation counted. Suddenly, the plane lurched violently, the left wing shuddering under stress. Emma's stomach dropped. She gritted her teeth and countered the movement, pushing the throttle and adjusting the rudder. Slowly, the plane responded, leveling enough to continue the approach. The co-pilot muttered under his breath, disbelief etched across his face. "I don't even know how she's doing this. It's impossible." Emma's gaze swept across the cabin through the small cockpit window. She saw terrified faces, eyes wide, some staring at the ceiling, some clutching loved ones. Each life aboard pressed down on her small shoulders like invisible weights, amplifying her focus. She could not fail. Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating the storm clouds in stark relief. The Dallas skyline shimmered faintly in the distance, a fragile promise of hope. Emma pressed forward, calculating, adjusting, stabilizing. Each movement was critical, each decision potentially life-saving. The captain's voice softened, almost reverent. "Emma, you're the only reason we have a chance. Hold her steady." Her small fingers flew over the controls, adjusting flaps, throttle, and rudder. Slowly, imperceptibly, the plane began to respond, stabilizing enough to attempt descent. But the final challenge, the critical landing, loomed ahead. Emma's heart hammered in her chest. She glanced at the captain and co-pilot, then at the small window showing the city lights below. The runway was close, but the storm had not relented, and the damaged wing remained fragile. One miscalculation could send the plane crashing into disaster. She took a deep breath, forcing calm over panic, and whispered to herself, "Focus. You've got this. We can make it." The co-pilot leaned back, eyes wide in awe. "I've never seen anyone handle anything like this. Not even the best pilots I've trained with. She's remarkable." Emma ignored the praise, focusing entirely on the descent. Each second stretched into an eternity. The plane trembled under every gust of wind, every quiver of metal, every flicker of storm. She adjusted, countered, and corrected, holding the plane as steady as possible. Finally, the faint outline of the runway appeared below, shimmering through the storm like a beacon of hope. Emma's heart leapt, but the challenge was far from over. The final approach would require every ounce of skill, courage, and precision she possessed. The captain's voice broke through the tension, calm yet urgent. "Emma, this is it. Prepare for manual stabilization landing. We're counting on you." Emma nodded, eyes steely. The plane lurched again, stronger this time, throwing passengers into brief panic. Drinks spilled, luggage rattled from overhead compartments. Flight attendants braced themselves as the cabin trembled. Emma's hands tightened on the controls, determination burning in her chest. She had trained for this. She had imagined it countless times. And now, at 11 years old, hundreds of miles above the ground, she was facing it for real. The city lights below grew brighter, the runway closer, the storm pressing in. But Emma Harper, small, underestimated, and fearless, held the fate of 200 lives in her hands. The plane shuddered violently, pitching forward and then to the side, as if the storm itself were trying to tear it apart. Emma Harper's small hands clutched the auxiliary controls with a white-knuckled grip, her fingers flying over levers and buttons with a precision that belied her 11 years. Sweat stung her eyes, but she refused to blink. Every second counted. Every adjustment could mean the difference between life and death. The co-pilot's voice trembled. "Left wing is losing more hydraulic function. We can't hold her steady much longer." Emma's stomach lurched as the plane dipped sharply. The cabin behind her erupted in screams, passengers gripping armrests, children sobbing, flight attendants bracing against the shaking fuselage. Drinks spilled across the aisles. Overhead bins popped open, spilling luggage and personal items in a chaotic rain of backpacks, briefcases, and shoes. "Emma," the captain shouted, voice taut with urgency. "You need to counter the roll now or we'll lose control." Her pulse pounded. Every instinct screamed panic, but she had trained for this moment. She adjusted the rudder, shifted the flaps, and pushed the throttle slightly forward. The plane responded, wobbling violently but resisting the pull of gravity that threatened to tip it over completely. "Keep her steady," the captain yelled. "We're still too high to attempt the landing." Emma's eyes flicked to the instruments. Warning lights blinked red in a frantic staccato. Alarms screamed. Sparks flickered on the console, sending shadows dancing across the cockpit. Her breath came in short, controlled bursts. She could feel the plane's stress in every vibration, every creak of metal. The co-pilot, still frozen with disbelief, finally reached for a secondary throttle to assist her, though he did so reluctantly. "I'll follow your lead," he muttered. His voice shook with awe and fear. He had trained for emergencies for years but never faced a scenario like this. A commercial jet in chaos, stabilized by the hands of a child prodigy. Emma adjusted the wings again, countering the turbulence with delicate, precise movements. The plane quivered but did not spiral. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself a breath, only to feel the next violent lurch. Outside, lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the churning clouds in stark, silver-white flashes. Thunder shook the plane to its core. Emma swallowed, her hands moving automatically, guided by instinct and training. She could see the faint outline of the Dallas skyline in the distance, a promise of hope, but the storm was relentless, testing her resolve at every turn. "Emma, we're going to have to start the descent now," the captain said, voice calm but tight with tension. "If we wait too long, the hydraulics could fail completely. Are you ready for manual stabilization?" Her stomach twisted, but she nodded firmly. "I'm ready," she said, though her voice betrayed nothing of the fear clawing at her chest. She had visualized this maneuver countless times in simulators, but now real lives depended on her. The plane lurched again, harder this time, sending a wave of panic through the cabin. Emma countered immediately, adjusting the rudder and flaps in rapid succession. Sparks from the cockpit console flickered dangerously close to her sleeve. Her small hands moved with almost mechanical precision, every decision crucial, every fraction of a second mattering more than it ever had in her life. A passenger screamed in row 14, gripping his child tightly. Another woman whispered a frantic prayer over her hands. Emma felt the weight of 200 lives pressing down on her, and it both terrified and strengthened her. She had to hold the plane steady. She had to save them. The co-pilot leaned closer, watching her movements with growing admiration. "I don't know how you're doing this," he whispered, voice barely audible. "It's miraculous." Emma allowed herself no time for praise. Another lurch, sharper than the last, shook the plane. She adjusted the throttle, raised the flaps slightly, and shifted the rudder again. Slowly, imperceptibly, the aircraft began to stabilize. The left wing, damaged and unresponsive for moments, held firm enough to allow continued descent. "Good, good," the captain muttered, his voice tight. "We may actually make it." Emma's heart pounded. The runway lights flickered faintly in the distance, growing brighter closer, but the storm was far from over. Wind shear threatened to push the plane off course, and the damaged hydraulics left no room for error. Every calculation, every movement, every tiny adjustment could make the difference between landing safely or catastrophe. Another violent jolt sent the plane tilting sharply to the right. Emma's stomach flipped, and a scream rose somewhere in the cabin. She pressed forward, adjusting flaps and rudder, pushing the throttle as needed. The plane shuddered but obeyed her commands. For now. The co-pilot whispered again, awestruck. "She's holding it together. She's actually holding it together." Emma allowed herself a single breath of relief, but it was short-lived. Another flash of lightning, another violent lurch, and she realized the real test was still ahead, aligning the damaged plane with the runway for a controlled, manual stabilization landing. One wrong move now, and all her efforts could be undone in an instant. The captain leaned over, his voice tense but supportive. "Emma, this is it. The final descent, keep her steady. We're counting on you." Her hands tightened on the controls. Outside, the city lights of Dallas shimmered faintly, barely visible through the storm's fury. The runway was close, but the wind, the damaged wing, and the failing hydraulics meant every second mattered. She adjusted flaps, countered gusts, and guided the plane with painstaking precision. The plane shuddered violently again, metal groaning. Sparks flickered on the instrument panel. Emma's pulse raced, adrenaline surging through her veins. Every muscle in her body was taut. She could feel the aircraft responding inch by inch to her skill and determination. In the cabin, passengers were silent, sensing the tension. Some clutched hands, others whispered prayers. The hum of engines, the vibration of the plane, and the occasional creak of stressed metal filled the air. Every second stretched into eternity. Emma's eyes flicked to the faint runway lights in the distance. She visualized the trajectory, anticipating turbulence and adjusting accordingly. The plane's response was delicate, fragile, but it held. Slowly, imperceptibly, she guided the aircraft toward a level descent. The captain's voice softened, tinged with awe. "Emma, this is extraordinary. You're keeping her steady. We might actually make it." Emma swallowed hard. She allowed herself no relief, no pause. One miscalculation could undo everything. The storm still raged, the left wing remained vulnerable, and the runway was still a distant promise. She pressed forward, hands moving with unwavering focus. The plane responded to her skill, inching closer to safety. For the first time, a sliver of hope glimmered amid the chaos. Emma Harper, an 11-year-old girl once asleep in seat 14C, was now the guiding hand keeping a commercial airliner from disaster. The co-pilot whispered almost reverently, "I don't know how you're doing it, but we're going to make it." Emma's small hands tightened on the controls. The storm howled outside, the plane shuddered violently, but for now she held it steady. The runway lights glimmered closer, a fragile line of hope against the darkness and fury of the storm. And in that moment she understood the weight of what she had done and what she was about to do. The runway lights of Dallas grew brighter through the storm, shimmering like fragile beacons against the darkness. Emma Harper's small hands tightened around the controls, knuckles white with tension. The plane shuddered violently with every gust of wind, each vibration echoing through the cabin like a warning. Her pulse raced, adrenaline surging through her veins, but her mind remained razor-sharp. The co-pilot leaned over, still trembling with disbelief. This is it. You're actually going to do this." He shook his head. "I've flown decades, handled emergencies, but never like this, with a kid guiding the descent." Emma ignored the praise. There was no room for ego, no luxury for distraction. The plane was still unstable. The left wing's damaged hydraulics limited her options. Every maneuver had to be precise, calculated, and instantaneous. She monitored instruments, adjusted flaps, manipulated the rudder, and throttled the engines with a skill that defied belief. The captain's voice came over her shoulder, calm but tense. "Emma, prepare for manual stabilization landing." The storm's gusts are unpredictable. You'll need to counter wind shear as you align with the runway. Emma swallowed hard. Manual stabilization was the riskiest maneuver a pilot could attempt. It required balancing a damaged plane, countering turbulence, and landing safely without autopilot. One misstep could send them plummeting into chaos. She drew in a steadying breath, repeating her father's words in her mind. Trust your instincts. Trust your training. You're ready. The plane lurched violently, throwing Emma against the jump seat. She gritted her teeth, countering the roll with subtle, precise movements. Sparks flickered across the console, alarms blared, and warning lights flashed red. The left wing groaned under stress, but she managed to maintain balance. In the cabin, passengers screamed and clutched each other as the plane quivered. Drinks spilled, children whimpered, and flight attendants braced for impact. One elderly woman muttered a prayer over her rosary. A man in row 20 clutched his tie as if it could tether him to safety. Emma ignored the panic around her, focusing entirely on the runway, the instruments, and the plane's behavior. She visualized the descent trajectory, anticipating turbulence, compensating for wind shear, and adjusting for the damaged hydraulics. Inch by inch, the aircraft inched closer to the runway. Emma, the captain said, voice tense but supportive, "You've stabilized her well. Now bring her down carefully." Her stomach twisted. This was it, the moment where all training, skill, and courage converged. The plane dipped lower, gusts buffeting the fuselage. Lightning flashed, illuminating the storm in stark white brilliance. Thunder shook the plane, rattling the instruments and sending adrenaline surging. Emma countered every movement, tiny adjustments that would seem insignificant to anyone else but were critical for survival. The co-pilot whispered, almost breathless, "She's holding it together. Incredible, absolutely incredible." Emma focused, hands moving automatically as muscle memory guided her. She compensated for wind gusts, adjusted the flaps delicately, and modulated engine thrust. The left wing, damaged but resilient, responded slowly but obeyed. Inch by inch, the plane aligned with the runway. Below, the lights blurred through rain and storm, a shimmering, fragile path toward safety. Emma's chest tightened. One wrong angle, one misjudged movement, and disaster could strike. But she refused to falter. Every life on board depended on her. A violent gust threw the plane off balance again. Emma's stomach lurched. She countered immediately, tilting the rudder, adjusting flaps, managing thrust, all in perfect coordination. The plane trembled but corrected. The runway lights grew closer. Hope flickered in the storm's shadow. "Emma, steady her," the captain shouted. "We're almost there." The co-pilot's voice shook. "You've got this, keep steady, don't let go." Emma swallowed hard, fighting the rising tide of fear. She focused on instruments, horizon, runway, and aircraft as one entity. Her hands moved with perfect precision, making micro-adjustments to keep the damaged plane level, steady, and on course. A final jolt nearly threw the plane off balance. Passengers gasped, gripping armrests in terror. Emma's pulse raced. She pressed forward, countering the turbulence, feeling every vibration, every creak of stressed metal. The plane's left wing threatened to give way, but her skill held it firm. Outside, the storm raged, rain lashing against the fuselage. Thunder shook the plane violently. The runway loomed closer, a narrow lifeline in a world of chaos. Emma pressed on, adjusting throttle, flaps, and rudder with precise calculation. The plane responded slightly, but enough. "Emma," the captain's voice softened, awe creeping into his tone, "you're doing the impossible." Emma's small body shook with exhaustion, but she ignored it. She couldn't stop. Not now. Every passenger, every life, every heartbeat on board depended on her skill. She pressed forward, guiding the plane through turbulence, aligning it perfectly with the runway. The co-pilot muttered under his breath, "I've never, ever, seen anyone do this, ever. Not even the most experienced pilots I know." The plane shuddered violently again as it crossed the last storm gusts. Emma adjusted flaps, countered drift, and held the plane steady. The runway lights grew larger, brighter, more defined. She could see the asphalt, the painted lines, the edges of safety. The cabin fell silent. Every passenger, sensing the climax of the ordeal, held their breath. The engines roared, rain lashed against the fuselage, and the plane teetered on the edge between chaos and controlled descent. Emma's small hands moved with perfect coordination, holding the aircraft steady against the storm's fury. "Emma," the captain whispered, voice barely audible over the roar, "bring her down. You can do it." Her heart hammered. This was it, the final moments. Every calculation, every adjustment, every ounce of courage mattered. The left wing groaned, warning lights flashed, and the fuselage quivered, but Emma held fast. Inch by inch, she guided the plane to the runway, countering wind shear, turbulence, and failing hydraulics. The runway stretched below, beckoning. Emma focused, her hands steady despite exhaustion. Every passenger, every flight attendant, every life on board hung in balance. One final adjustment, one final calculation, one final push. The plane touched down. The wheels kissed the runway with a jolt. Emma countered immediately, stabilizing the aircraft as friction and momentum worked against her. Sparks flew from the undercarriage, engines roared, but she held control. Inch by inch, the plane slowed, eventually rolling steadily along the runway. A collective gasp rose from the cabin. Flight attendants hugged passengers. Children clung to parents. Some passengers wept. The plane came to a complete stop, tires screeching gently against wet asphalt. Emma's hands fell from the controls, her body trembling, tears stinging her eyes. The co-pilot leaned back, disbelief and awe etched across his face. She did it. She actually did it. The captain exhaled deeply, voice raw with relief. "Emma Harper, I don't have words. You saved us all, every single one." Emma blinked, overwhelmed, exhausted, and trembling. She had done the impossible. The storm still raged around the airport, but inside the plane, hope and relief spread like wildfire. And in that moment, the sleepy 11-year-old girl in seat 14C became a hero, a legend, a name that would never be forgotten. The cabin was alive with a strange mix of relief, disbelief, and awe. Passengers slowly unclenched their hands, wiped tears from their faces, and whispered to one another in stunned tones. A collective hush of gratitude and shock hung in the air, broken only by the soft sobs of children and murmurs of relief. Flight attendants moved through the aisles, checking on passengers, helping them regain composure. "Everyone okay?" one asked gently, voice trembling with her own lingering adrenaline. The passengers nodded, some still gripping loved ones, others staring blankly, processing the miracle that had just unfolded. Emma sat in the jump seat, trembling, her small hands still gripping the straps. She could hardly believe what she had just accomplished. The storm outside had not relented, but inside the cabin, a fragile peace settled. She felt the weight of eyes on her and slowly turned to meet them. Gasps and whispered awe spread like wildfire through the cabin. The co-pilot, still pale and in disbelief, leaned over to the captain. She really did it. An 11-year-old flying a commercial jet. I've never seen anything like this in my life. The captain, face lined with exhaustion and relief, nodded. She's extraordinary, a true natural. I don't know how to put this into words. His eyes shifted toward Emma. Thank you, Emma. You saved us all. Passengers began approaching her cautiously, some clapping softly, others offering shaky smiles. A mother held her child close, whispering, "That little girl, she saved us. She really saved us." A businessman, still pale, reached over to Emma's backpack, unsure whether to shake her hand or simply nod in awe. I don't even know what to say," he stammered. Emma looked down, blushing, overwhelmed. I just did what I had to," she whispered. Her voice, though small, carried the quiet confidence that had guided her through the storm. The captain's voice came again over the intercom, steady and commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, thanks to extraordinary courage and skill, we've safely landed. Please remain seated as we complete the final checks. And someone on this flight has done something remarkable." Whispers spread like wildfire. "Did she say what I think she said? A child? No way." The news spread through the cabin faster than any storm outside. Emma's heroism was becoming impossible to ignore. The co-pilot leaned closer to Emma. "You know, you just redefined what it means to be a pilot. Not just a good pilot, a hero." Emma felt her chest swell and then tighten at the word hero. She had done what needed to be done, but she wasn't used to this kind of attention, this kind of praise. She looked down, fiddling nervously with her straps, trying to shrink into herself despite the eyes fixed on her. The passenger's admiration was palpable. A little boy approached timidly, holding out a crumpled toy plane. You saved us," he said softly. "Thank you." Emma offered him a shy smile, her heart aching at the weight of responsibility and the gratitude she now faced firsthand. Meanwhile, news of the miraculous landing spread quickly. Flight attendants, still buzzing with adrenaline, began calling air traffic control, relaying the extraordinary story. Within minutes, airport staff and local authorities were informed. The storm had delayed immediate media attention, but word traveled fast. What had begun as a routine flight had become a story that would soon grip the nation. Airport personnel gathered near the plane, their eyes wide as they watched the passengers disembark. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, microphones thrust toward anyone who could explain what had happened. The captain and co-pilot, still recovering from the ordeal, were the first to give statements. "It was incredible," the captain said, voice cracking slightly. "The landing, it was executed by an 11-year-old girl. I've never witnessed anything like it." Emma, guided gently by flight attendants, stepped off the plane. The crowd outside was a mix of journalists, airport staff, and first responders. Flashbulbs popped, cameras clicked, and voices shouted questions she barely understood. She blinked, overwhelmed by the sudden attention. "Emma Harper, how does it feel to save over 200 lives?" one reporter shouted. She hesitated. Her voice was small but steady. I just did what I could. I had to help." Her words rippled through the crowd. The humility in her voice, the calm bravery despite her age, left many speechless. Even seasoned journalists, accustomed to heroes of adult age, paused to absorb the gravity of her courage. Authorities and airline officials began arriving. The flight was being debriefed, passengers offered assistance, and emergency protocols were reviewed, but attention kept returning to the girl who had defied every expectation. News vans outside prepared live feeds. Social media buzzed instantly, as early reports spread across phones and networks, labeling Emma Harper a national hero. Inside, Emma's parents were finally allowed near her. They embraced, holding her tightly, a mixture of relief, pride, and disbelief flooding their expressions. "Emma, we're so proud of you," her father whispered, tears in his eyes. "You were amazing." Her mother clutched her to her chest. "I can't believe it. You saved everyone. Our little girl," she trailed off, overcome with emotion. Emma buried her face in her mother's shoulder, overwhelmed not only by the flight but by the sudden realization that the world had witnessed her courage. News crews clamored for statements. Officials praised her skill and bravery, describing how an 11-year-old had stabilized a damaged commercial jet in a storm, safely landing it despite failing hydraulics and fierce wind shear. The story spread nationally within hours. Hashtags like Girl Pilot Hero and Emma Harper trended almost instantly. Social media erupted with admiration, shock, and awe. Flight attendants, passengers, and crew offered repeated thanks, hugs, and stories of how Emma's calm and skill had saved them. The co-pilot, still shaking, held her small hand gently. "I'll never forget this. Neither will anyone else." Meanwhile, the captain addressed the media, voice steady, infused. "Emma Harper has changed the way we think about courage, skill, and heroism. Today, an 11-year-old saved us all, and for that, we are eternally grateful." Emma, still overwhelmed, looked up at the flashing cameras and reporters. Her voice, soft but firm, carried across the crowd. "I just did my best, that's all." But the world understood differently. To millions who would later read the story, see the videos, or watch the news segments, Emma Harper had done far more than her best. She had faced impossible odds, mastered fear, and demonstrated bravery beyond her years. She had rewritten the rules of what it meant to be a hero, and no one could ignore it. And as the first responders, officials, and journalists continued to gather around her, Emma Harper stood quietly, small and unassuming, yet at the center of a storm of gratitude, awe, and recognition. She had saved lives, captured hearts, and inspired a nation. But despite the attention, her thoughts were already elsewhere. Back on the cockpit, back on the flight, remembering every terrifying, exhilarating moment that had brought her to this impossible triumph. Outside, the storm clouds slowly parted, revealing a glimpse of the Dallas skyline. The first rays of sunlight broke through, illuminating the runway where the miraculous landing had taken place. For Emma Harper, it was both an ending and a beginning, a moment she would never forget, and one that would forever define her place in the world. The next morning, the story of Emma Harper had taken on a life of its own. Social media feeds were flooded with images, clips, and headlines celebrating the 11-year-old girl who had saved over 200 lives. News anchors, analysts, and commentators replayed the landing footage over and over, dissecting every moment of the storm, every flicker of warning lights, and every miraculous adjustment Emma had made. Her parents watched from their living room, clutching each other, tears streaming down their faces. "I still can't believe it," her father whispered. "She really did it." Her mother shook her head, voice choked. She's our little girl, and yet she's more than that now. She's a hero." Meanwhile, the airline issued an official statement praising her bravery, noting that Emma had taken control of a fully loaded commercial aircraft in extreme turbulence, stabilized it despite failing hydraulics, and executed a perfect manual landing. Aviation experts, meteorologists, and pilots from across the country weighed in, calling the feat unprecedented, and a textbook display of courage and skill far beyond her years. Emma Harper, the girl who had once quietly slept through the hum of a plane, had become the most talked-about hero in the United States. Offers for interviews, appearances, and accolades poured in. But despite the attention, Emma remained quiet, her humility intact. She had saved lives, yes, but she had no desire for fame. For her, the most important thing was knowing that everyone on the flight was safe. The school day that Monday was surreal. Students whispered, teachers paused mid-lesson, and parents couldn't stop checking their phones to follow updates on the girl who had become a national sensation overnight. When Emma arrived, there was a mixture of awe and excitement, and the principal had prepared a small assembly to honor her. "Ladies and gentlemen, students and faculty," the principal began, voice steady but emotional, "today we have among us someone extraordinary. Someone whose courage, skill, and determination saved over 200 lives. Please welcome Emma Harper." The applause was thunderous. Students cheered, parents clapped, and even the teachers wiped tears from their eyes. Emma stepped forward, small and shy, her hair slightly mussed, eyes wide with the realization of what had just happened. She smiled softly, blushing at the attention. I just did what I had to," she said quietly, voice barely audible over the continued applause. "I was scared, but I focused on helping, that's all." Her words only amplified admiration. Students whispered to each other, "She's so humble, she saved lives, and she's still just herself." The assembly was filled with awe, yet the emotional weight of what she had accomplished settled like a quiet pride in every heart. The airline arranged a private meeting between Emma, her family, and the captain and co-pilot of the flight. The two men, still awed, shook her hand repeatedly. "You were incredible," the captain said, voice raw with emotion. "I've flown for decades, faced emergencies I thought impossible, and you managed what no adult pilot could have done under the same conditions. You saved us all." Emma's father, tears in his eyes, hugged her tightly. "You've always been brave, Emma, but this is beyond anything I could have imagined." The co-pilot added, "I don't know how to explain it. Watching you in the cockpit, it was like watching a seasoned fighter pilot, every movement perfect. You didn't just handle the plane, you controlled fate itself." Despite the overwhelming attention, Emma remained quiet and composed. Fame, accolades, and national headlines did not change her. She had faced fear, responsibility, and danger, and had come through with courage and skill. The quiet satisfaction of having saved lives was enough for her. Within days, the media coverage intensified. Headlines proclaimed her a national hero. Social media campaigns celebrated her bravery, with hashtags like Emma Harper and Young Hero trending across the country. Politicians, celebrities, and pilots alike offered praise. News outlets broadcast interviews with aviation experts who analyzed the landing, explaining in awe how Emma had stabilized a plane in extreme turbulence and executed a near-perfect landing despite failing hydraulics. Awards, invitations, and recognition followed. But through it all, Emma remained focused on her true self, a young girl who loved aviation, who had dreamed of flying, and who had acted decisively when no one else could. The flight passengers, all deeply moved, maintained contact with Emma and her family. One mother wrote a heartfelt letter. "Emma, you didn't just save our lives, you showed my children what courage truly looks like. We will never forget you." Another passenger sent a drawing made by her child, depicting Emma at the controls, the storm raging around her, and the plane landing safely. Even the airline celebrated her in quiet, official ways. They arranged a special certificate recognizing her heroism, listing every detail of the flight, and acknowledging her unprecedented achievement. The certificate described her as an extraordinary young pilot whose courage and skill saved countless lives. Despite all the recognition, Emma's heart remained humble. She continued to attend school, play with friends, and pursue her love of aviation. Yet she now carried a quiet pride and a sense of responsibility that would shape her for the rest of her life. The world had witnessed her bravery, and the lives she saved would never forget her. One evening, as she sat with her parents reflecting on the whirlwind of events, Emma's father asked softly, "Do you understand what you've done, Emma? Not just today, but for everyone who's heard your story." Emma looked out the window at the clear sky, remembering the storm, the runway, and the people she had guided to safety. She smiled faintly. "I did what I had to do. I helped people, and maybe it will inspire someone else to be brave too." Her mother hugged her tightly. "You already have, sweetheart, you already have." And indeed, the story of Emma Harper became more than just a tale of one miraculous landing. It became a story of courage, responsibility, and the power of skill and composure under pressure. A nation had watched in awe as a young girl faced impossible odds and emerged victorious. She became a symbol of hope, bravery, and quiet heroism, a reminder that even the smallest among us can rise to the greatest challenges. Emma's life changed in subtle ways. Invitations to aviation programs, mentorships, and youth leadership opportunities poured in. She had a new understanding of her abilities, a profound confidence, and a deep appreciation for the responsibility that came with skill. She remained grounded, humble, and kind, a hero not only in action but in character. Months later, as Emma returned to the skis in a small training aircraft under careful supervision, she reflected on that day, the storm, the passengers, the chaos, and the landing. She smiled quietly, feeling the thrill of flight and the knowledge that courage was not measured by age, but by the willingness to act when it mattered most. And as she soared above the clouds, looking down at the world below, Emma Harper understood a truth she would carry forever. Bravery isn't the absence of fear, it's taking action despite it. Her story, once just an ordinary flight, had become legend, and the girl who had slept quietly in row had awakened the world to the hero within. The end.